So good evening. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining me for this installment of the Sustainability Advisory Board's educational series. My name is Greg Smith. I've lived in West Linn since the early 90s, down by Willamette Park, taught at Lewis and Clark College in the Graduate School of Education and Counseling for 23 years before retiring in 2016. Had a chance to teach courses on educational foundations and literacy, but also specialized in courses in environmental education and sustainability. A lot of my research during that time focused on what's called place and community-based education, which is an approach aimed at really encouraging kids to develop a sense of connection and sense of responsibility to their communities by bringing in more local knowledge and concerns and experiences. Had a chance to actually teach that approach to about 70 teachers in the West Linn-Wilsonville district about a decade ago. I think those interests have certainly influenced my decision to join the Sustainability Advisory Board, and also the topic of my talk this evening, which is really aimed at finding ways to enhance West Linn's capacity to respond to some of the challenges likely to be associated with climate change, as well as other forms of uncertainty and instability in our society as a whole. Now, see if I can bring up my PowerPoint right now. And can everybody see that?
Yep.
Good, great. And I will get rid of, well, I'll talk a little bit more so you can see my face. This evening, I'd like to share an idea I've been cooking up about what I'm calling neighborhood resilience teams. That would be composed of 3 or more people from a neighborhood of 15 to 25 homes who would take on the task of organizing events that would bring people together to prepare for possible short-term emergencies, but also lay the groundwork for longer-term forms of support and care. After discussing why current conditions might make such an organization helpful, I'll describe ways people in other communities are addressing this issue, and already existing efforts in West Linn we could build on to get something like that started here. I'm hoping that you'll be willing to share some of your thoughts about this possibility when I've finished, and maybe join me in my effort to turn what's currently an idea into reality. I can find the, are you seeing any images on the side, or are you seeing the entire PowerPoint?
I can see your first slide, the neighborhood resilience teams getting ready for.
Okay, that's good. Just as long as you can see that, that's great. So over the past 2 decades, the notion of resilience has become commonly associated with the concept of sustainability, especially as the impacts of climate change have become more widely experienced across the planet. Even in what had thought to be the relatively safe Pacific Northwest, recurrent fires and extreme weather events like the 2021 ice storm and heat dome have made it abundantly clear that people in this region are not immune from the consequences of climate instability. You know, even the unseasonable snowstorm that we had in the past couple of days is indicative of the fact that we just can't exactly predict what weather's going to do to us anymore. And I heard this morning there were 100,000 people without power yesterday in West Linn, with a similar set of conditions as what we experienced with the ice storm. I've been thinking about resilient communities, and what I mean by this is that resilient communities are those that are able to respond safely and effectively to such events in ways that sustain the well-being and health of their citizens. Cities across the country have recognized the important role that volunteers at the neighborhood level must play in responding to unexpected events like earthquakes, floods, and wildfires in ways that contribute to community resilience. Some have created programs to prepare people to step in when other public service providers are either overwhelmed with massive need or unable to provide support because of damaged infrastructure. Portland's Bureau of Emergency Management, for example, has sponsored the creation of neighborhood emergency teams throughout the city. Since the mid-1990s, over 4,000 volunteers 2,100 of whom are still active, have been trained to fight fires, provide basic first aid, and organize teams for people who may be caught in collapsed buildings. Finally, the NET teams provide interested neighbors with instruction in developing an emergency kit and set of supplies, including enough food and water to get them through a week or 2-week period, or possibly longer. Similar programs in Milwaukee, Lake Oswego, and Oregon City are supported by a program called Community Emergency Response Teams, or CERT, and are overseen by staff at the county level. Resilience, however, involves more than the ability to take action in response to a specific emergency, as important as this is. Resilient communities are also ones able to continue to provide for their members in the face of longer-term events, tied into things like economic disruptions like the 2008-2009 recession or the current pandemic. Climate change will bring its own unique long-term challenges as people adjust to a range of unforeseen consequences that could include diminished access to affordable food as once predictable weather patterns change, the influx of climate refugees from places like Southern California or the Southwest, more expensive energy sources as oil and gas production costs increase or supplies are disrupted, as is currently the case, and economic instability brought about by changing environmental and social conditions. Addressing the root causes of these problems will require action at national and international levels, but there is also much that people at the local level can do to support one another in the face of these uncertainties. It's here that neighborhood and community resilience hold some promise as we prepare for the unknown. And it's here that average citizens like you and me can find ways to respond to what often seems to be overwhelming and unsolvable problems within the context of our own lives. I first became alerted to how this might be done while visiting New Zealand in January 2014. I've been asked to give a keynote address at the New Zealand Environmental Education Association annual meeting in Christchurch. On the first afternoon of the conference, participants traveled to different sites around the region to see how residents were rebuilding after an earthquake and major aftershocks 3 years earlier had destroyed buildings throughout the urban core, suburbs, and neighboring towns. I traveled to a small community named Lyttelton that serves as the port of Christchurch, directly east of the city, but across the steep lip of an extinct volcano whose ocean-filled caldera serves as a perfect harbor. After the most serious of the earthquakes in February 2011, Lyttelton was completely cut off from the rest of New Zealand's South Island for 2 weeks. The quake destroyed many of the town's historic buildings, as well as damaging residential homes. With a population of approximately 3,000, the residents were dependent upon themselves for their own emergency response. My group from the conference met with Margaret Jeffries, who was at that time the director of Project Lyttelton, an organization supported by the Lyttelton Harbor Business Association. Prior to the earthquake, Margaret had been instrumental in organizing volunteer groups like the Lyttelton Time Bank that facilitated non-monetized labor exchanges among local residents. So a person with a particular kind of skill could contribute an hour's worth of labor to someone else, and that would be recorded in the time bank. That person could then request an hour's worth of labor from somebody else who was a participant in the time bank to get work that they needed to have done themselves. Members of this group were central players in efforts to locate housing for people who had lost their homes and provide other needed services and support in the initial aftermath of the disaster. While in Lyttelton, we were shown a number of projects aimed at advancing community resilience and sustainability, including community gardens and a cooperative grocery store. My more recent exploration of work that Margaret started, she passed away in 2020, revealed the extent to which residents of Lyttelton have taken steps to strengthen their own community. They support a weekly farmers market, regular repair and mending events, a learning exchange that encourages residents to share knowledge and skills with one another, a library of resources about contributing to effective community change, and a program aimed at helping people adopt carbon neutral lifestyles. All of these efforts constitute an ecology of human responses that are deepening residents' social ties and enhancing the town's resilience. What I saw in Littleton is how one small community, the size of neighborhoods like Willamette or Bolton or Robin Hood in West Linn, have been able to weave through its own resources, some outside grants, and an abundance of local energy and goodwill, a network of relationships that allowed it to survive and rebuild after a major natural disaster, and do so in ways that have enhanced its resilience. This has been largely thanks to the simple fact that people who might otherwise have been strangers now know how to work with one another in support of the common good. This seems like the sort of thing that could be done anywhere, and certainly in a place like West Linn, where a variety of efforts have already laid a strong foundation for this kind of work. The food pantry, occasional repair clinics held at the Robinwood Station, the farmers market in Willamette, the community gardens by Fields Bridge and in the Robinwood neighborhood, and our active inclusion committee. The West Linn Lake Oswego Village organization, with its work to link elders with one another to provide mutual support, is another citizen-led project that mirrors the kind of work that contributed to Littleton's resilience. At issue is extending these efforts to include more and more of the city's residents through the work of people at the neighborhood level, willing to organize events aimed at responding more effectively to things like ice storms or fires, but also grow social networks that could offer support in more normal conditions. As mentioned earlier, when we think of emergency response, the events that generally gain our attention are associated with natural disasters like earthquakes or floods. Although primarily aimed at preparing people to provide rescue and medical support for trapped or injured neighbors, programs like Portland's neighborhood emergency teams also lay the foundation for forms of mutual aid that can be beneficial over the long term. One element of the neighborhood emergency team's work involves what is called community mapping, something that actually started happening in West Linn in 2015 as well. This exercise invites people from nearby homes along a city block or cul-de-sac to identify their skills, be they practical, medical, or technical, tools or equipment they're willing to lend, such as portable generators or chainsaws, and individuals who may need special care, including elders, people with disabilities, and young children.
I just have to interrupt. I'm in that picture.
You're in that picture? Great.
Yes, I'm right on the right side. Wow, it's still around, that old picture.
Oh,
wow.
Good. It's actually up on the West Linn city website.
Oh, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I thought it was.
Yeah, cool.
Huh.
So neighbors are asked to label water, gas, and electricity shutoffs and indicate on a map distributed to others where they are located. When they meet with one another, they identify specific hazards and needs unique to their neighborhood and determine ways that can potentially help those with special needs. An emergency contact list can also be created at this time. Completing a mapping exercise can go a long way toward overcoming the anonymity that often characterizes life in modern cities and provides at least a foundation for support in case of an emergency. This, as well as instruction on assembling an emergency cache of food and water, could be among the first activities taken on by members of a neighborhood resilience team. That foundation can be strengthened and built upon if neighbors find ways to interact with one another without necessarily being motivated to do so because of an emergency. This is where the kinds of activities in a place like Littleton may provide a useful model. Although these emerge from a small town rather than a neighborhood, they can serve as a stimulus for imagining the possibles. Neighbors, for example, could explore ways they might encourage more local gardening and food sharing. People with large lots and plenty of sun could invite neighbors with smaller and shadier lots to grow vegetables with them on their property, something that is currently being done in Anchorage, Alaska through a program called Yardacopia, which also provides instruction in gardening. One of my neighbors in Willamette, for example, has established a community asparagus patch where people who help out with the weeding or share other produce like fresh eggs get to pick what they want in the spring. Similarly, neighbors with fruit trees could make their produce available to others when often wasted apples, pears, or plums are ready to be harvested. Friends who live down the street from me hold an annual apple pressing event and then distribute the cider to family members and neighbors who have contributed to the bulk purchase of crates of fruit or brought apples from their own trees. Neighbors could also plan events that bring them together over the course of a year. Annual block parties, for example, have become a feature of many neighborhoods. If people are willing, these get-togethers can become more frequent. In West Lynn's Willamette neighborhood, before COVID, people have for years regularly gathered for major holidays like Easter, the 4th of July, Labor Day, and New Year's for potlucks or progressive dinners. When we first moved to West Lynn in the early 1990s, we got to know people thanks to regular Thursday night potlucks. We'd call one of 3 or 4 people, learn where the potluck was being held that week, gather our 3 boys and a dish to serve, and spend a couple of hours being drawn into this new community. And when the 1996 flood happened, one of the neighbors we'd gotten to know at these events invited us into her home as the river rose, while others advised us when it was time to load our furniture into a moving van and take it up the hill. Every Tuesday for the past couple of years during the pandemic, my wife still gets together virtually with half a dozen quote unquote wild women of Willamette, whom she got to know in our first years in West Lynn. I feel blessed to have lived for nearly 3 decades in a place where this sort of neighborliness is so well rooted. But my impression in speaking with others is that my experience is not all that common. There's no reason this needs to be the case. All that's required to remedy it is the willingness of a handful of people per neighborhood to take the lead and create the opportunities for these social interactions to occur. Not only are these experiences valuable with regard to preparing for possible emergencies, but they're also fun and can play an important role in bringing people who might otherwise remain strangers together. A simple step to make this happen is to collect emails from interested and willing neighbors to inform one another about get-togethers, needs, or other issues of neighborhood interest. Neighbors along Volpe and Ninth Streets, where I live, have communicated via email several times over the past few years to make sure people have been okay when the lights have gone out or the air has been difficult to breathe, and to inform one another about shared concerns. In addition to advocating for many of the practices described already, community-based organizations in Northern California encourage a variety of different strategies for strengthening social ties and reciprocity at the neighborhood level. Cooperative Humboldt, for example, holds neighborhood work parties where people help one another complete projects that would otherwise be burdensome for an individual family. They also encourage crop swaps, bulk buying programs, fruit tree planting in yards and parking strips, the formation of neighborhood book and tool libraries, and even the creation of neighborhood electrical power grids. With regard to this final initiative, the Oakland EcoBlock project is currently working with the UC Berkeley Institute for Energy and Environment to establish a microgrid in which all households on a city block will share the expense of installing solar panels and storage batteries, and then benefit from the power created by this system. In Marin County, Resilient Neighborhoods has since 2010 been focusing on educating residents to reduce their carbon emissions and build community resilience through the formation of teams trained to organize workshops for their families and neighbors, where they explore how to live well and at the same time use less fossil fuel. Participants conserve water, cut energy use and waste, make less carbon-intensive food choices, and select non-fossil fuel transportation options. In the fall of 2021, the organization reached an annual milestone when it documented that 10 million pounds of carbon had not been released into the atmosphere, thanks to citizen efforts. At the regional level, the county government established Drawdown Marin, which similarly makes available information on its website about ways to reduce carbon emissions through changes in how people buy and use energy, get from one place to another, construct buildings, purchase food and dispose of food waste, make land use decisions that foster more carbon sequestration, and enhance the resilience of their own communities through the creation of resilience hubs, capable of supporting diverse residents in the event of climate-related or other natural disasters. Another Oakland organization called Bay Localize has been leading its own workshops since 2009, aimed at strengthening community resilience, both from a standpoint of climate change, but also people's ability to support themselves in the middle of an unstable economy. Believing that the healthiest and most effective solutions are likely to arise out of citizens' capacity to address these issues locally, they engage the public in extended planning conversations about ways they can support themselves in a more equitable and sustainable manner. In their workshops, they explore our common need for food, water, energy, transportation, jobs, and social support, central dimensions of any effort to increase resilience, and emphasize the importance of assuring that access to quality resources is both fair and sustainable. Beyond the US and New Zealand, the most significant work with regard to community resilience I've encountered has been in Great Britain. In England, efforts are being made in rural and urban communities to create climate emergency centers. These centers have three essential elements. They focus on solutions for people and the planet that can be enacted locally. They seek to be inclusive and attentive to community needs. They intentionally look beyond their own borders and are active participants in a wider network for mutual support and cooperation. In Scotland, the government is now supporting the development of a network of regional climate action hubs aimed at similarly developing local plans to reduce reliance on automobiles, cut waste, grow local food, and lower energy use in homes and community buildings. All strategies that will make the country more able to adapt to the challenges of a changing climate. In conclusion, neighborhood resilience teams could serve as a catalyst for similar projects in our own community. People interested in creating a team like this could begin by completing a mapping exercise, plan for emergencies, and collect neighbors' email addresses. They could go on to organize neighborhood gatherings like block parties or picnics when the weather's warm, or indoor potlucks when it's cool. At those gatherings, they might explore possibilities for shared gardening or harvest activities, as well as identifying elderly residents or single or young parents who could benefit from additional support and attention. They could organize work parties to help someone build a fence or paint a house. They could educate one another about how to reduce fossil fuel consumption, and might even consider the creation of a neighborhood solar power grid on an especially sunny site, and begin consulting with PGE about what they need to do to bring such a project into reality. My guess is that in nearly every neighborhood, there will be a handful of people who by nature will be excited about doing things like this. You might be one of those people. The task is discovering and encouraging these folks to reach out to more of their neighbors and look for opportunities to engage in activities or projects that will increase their ability to support one another. All of these activities will lay the foundation for the cooperation and social trust that will be of value when we are faced with other short-term emergencies. But more than this, they will create the kind of caring and supportive communities that most of us want to live in anyway. Communities like these will, in the end, be more resilient and sustainable when faced with a future that seems increasingly unstable and unpredictable. Our welfare will depend on our ability to work with one another. By learning how to work with one another now, we will be better able to work with one another then. So, as the Sustainability Advisory Board and I attempt to put feet on these ideas, it would be very helpful to have as much input as I can get from the community. And I'd like to spend some time now with you, getting some feedback as well as ideas you have about possibilities we haven't considered and next steps. So to begin with, I'd be grateful if you just spend a minute jotting down some of your thoughts about these ideas, and then I will kind of close down the PowerPoint and we can talk with one another on gallery view. I have also placed all these questions in your chat boxes, so you can check that out there as well. So if you have a piece of paper and a pen in front of you, just spend a minute jotting some ideas down. If you don't, just think and think of something that you would like to share about these ideas and your response to them. So I'll give you 60 seconds. is I don't want, how can I get rid of that? Let's go back to view. So if you could turn on your videos as well as your speakers, I'll be able to see you. And to kind of facilitate the conversation, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, there is a place where it says mute, stop video, etc. So if you haven't used Zoom before, there's a place called reactions. And if you click on reactions, you'll see you can raise a hand. And that way I'll be able to know whether or not you're interested in actually sharing something. Everybody see where that is? I'll show you what it looks like. Great. Okay. So I will get rid of my hand.
Oh.
And so, Christina, what would you like to share?
We moved here 5 years ago from an inner suburb of Cleveland, and I had been looking for something like this since we got here, so thank you. When we first moved in, I invited all the neighbors that I knew or could find over to get to know them, but I find that this area is very unlike the inner suburb from Ohio where we moved from. And I really applaud the start towards emergency preparedness. Went to an actual function at Bridal Mile in the West Hills in Portland and found out that Multnomah County is doing things that, why isn't West Linn doing this? So, you know, we're right on track there to get going. And I'm very interested in getting this going. Block parties, getting to know the neighbors. If it weren't for COVID, I would have had some people, and we have a very small house and a small yard, but you know, we can find someone who will do that. So I'm with you.
Great, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cheryl.
Hi, everybody. I live on Windsor Terrace, which is part of the Sunset neighborhood right above the high school. And we moved here in 2011. And what I just wrote down in my notes is that when we had the ice storm, I saw that the neighbors came out of their house and they were all talking to each other, especially in the immediate area where my home is. And we were sharing what our concerns were and looking out for each other. And what ended up happening is that then the pandemic came and everybody just kind of went into their little cocoon. And
Right.
I understand why, because of the health issues and things like that. And it's time to maybe reach out again. And the other thing I've noticed is that there's been a lot of transition in our neighborhood, even though I'm talking about just this one street that's probably got like 30 houses. Many have turned over, people are moving out and moving in. So there's a lot of dynamics here, I think, that make it challenging. But I think that, one other thing I wanted to say is I am also a neighborhood leader as part of the Democratic Party, and I've had a chance to meet some people, not on my immediate street, but in the streets around because of my assignment. So that was one way I forced myself to see what the other cities, or not cities, but the other streets were doing in my immediate neighborhood. So there's more I can do, but those are some observations that I just wanted to share about my experience.
Great. Thank you very much. Kim. You're muted.
Okay, there it is.
Oh,
Yes, okay,
great.
thank you. I really wanted to echo that sentiment to anyone here that's new and moving in and not knowing their neighbors. And I've lived here since '97. And when I first moved in, I mean, nobody talked to me except a couple neighbors. And the second year I was here, and I love Halloween, I handed out 100 flyers all the way to the fire station to the whole neighborhood. And I said, treat or treat, just stop by my house. Even if you're an introvert, you can just say hi, grab a cookie and leave. And only 4 people showed up, a mother and her son that I had worked with, and another neighbor that I already knew. So out of all those invitations, and I had a lot of food, and it was good, it was healthy, it was junky, nobody showed up. And until I tore out my front yard, that's when I met everybody, because they could come to you, because everybody wanted to know why it looked like a gopher on steroids at my front yard. So I'd be out there working, I was putting in irrigation, tearing out the lawn, and everybody's like, what you doing? So, you know, that approach, I met a lot of people, but it was certainly not from trying to meet them by inviting them. The neighbors across the street at a cul-de-sac have an annual party. And then I also met a lot of people by participating in the historic play in Willamette. I didn't know I lived on the wrong side of Willamette Falls Drive, you know, so that's when I met everybody. But it's really, I hear that challenge of trying to meet people.
Yeah.
And I think you're spot on with events where people can gather, you know, and not like, hey, let's be scared about what's happening for emergencies. But like you said, what do you do? What's going on? What do you have interest in? And I believe all of the neighborhood associations, correct me if I'm wrong, have money from the city so that they can just have an annual picnic. There's money for snacks for everybody if we use it.
So really using food as a temptation, as a vehicle. See, who is Gallery Tab A? What's your name?
Hello, my name is Tom Wagoner. I've been a resident of West Linn for, over 30 years now. I just retired from the National Guard, so this hits close to home for me. I was part of those 1996 flood response teams. During that time period, I've fought the fires. Anytime there's an emergency, I've typically been involved in responding to that. So now that I don't have to put on that pickle suit anymore, I'd like to think local and see how I can participate and offer my services to the neighborhood.
Fantastic, fantastic. Noelle, and you're muted. Well, if you join us, Noelle, let me know. Do you have anything else that you wanted to say, Christina?
I do, in terms of the neighborhood associations. I know I've attended by Zoom only one, which because I recently found out it was active, and CJ is overloaded, but they seem to be sort of political and digesting the city goings on. But I wonder if that's also an avenue to sort of, the attendance at the meeting that I was at was very low. So maybe bringing two things together, we might be able to make a bigger whole.
Yes, right.
You know?
I'm on the agenda for the Neighborhood Association President's meeting in May. So we'll talk with them. And I've also talked with Doug Erickson at the library about meeting with church and civic organization leaders, just to get the idea out. And just, you know, my sense is, again, that those folks are out there. That at issue is just kind of bringing them together and figuring out how we can kind of problem solve, you know, some of the issues that you've already brought up in terms of just the difficulty, particularly in a more affluent community where people oftentimes are really busy, to get them together to actually kind of do a little bit of playing and just hang out. So I think that's part of the challenge, is both addressing the emergencies, but really kind of providing an opportunity for people to really get to know one another.
Right.
Sue.
If I could say one more thing, I think another difficulty for me personally and my husband is we're on Pimlico Drive. And even in our little neighborhood that was 1 block long, where we had 50 some houses on the street, east and west, you got to know the people on your side of the street better. But on Pimlico Drive, although we do know the people across the street and on either side of them, it's really hard to sort of get together with people on a connecting street or an even busier street. So that's just something else I'll put out there.
No, I think it's good to really kind of think through what the challenges are so we can kind of more explicitly address them. Sue, what would you like to share?
Hi. Well, I did want to say that picture that I was in was signing up for the earthquake neighborhood, get everyone's email and address. And the funny part about the picture, those of us in that one are already friends, and probably the few out of a 30, 35 houses that get together and socialize. And we probably don't reach out as much to the other neighbors, you know, during this, unless a tree falls down or something during one of those events. But I did want to just remind everyone, there is one neighborhood association not functioning. So what this appeals to me is I don't have to participate in that avenue. I can just with a group of friends, but I just wonder how we get information if it's not through our neighborhood association.
And, you know, that would be a question that I think people who are interested in moving forward with an initiative like this could kind of address themselves. You know, and eventually, it might be conceivable to make it part of the work of the Sustainability Advisory Board, for example.
Oh, that's a great idea.
See like what happens with regard to that. So, Kim, did you have something else that you wanted to share? Okay.
Yes, the neighborhood associations, when you talk to the President's Association, they really are a good opportunity for communication, especially, you know, like it was very frustrating when the power was out last year during the ice storm, and getting good information out. And as anyone who's been involved in emergency planning knows, you know, if communications are down, nobody's coming to your house. So it's one avenue of getting word out and getting communication. And I've talked to a lot of people in the neighborhood or just around about this subject. And when I bring up neighborhood associations, they kind of grimace and go, you know, like and I'm like, what's up? Why don't you like going to those meetings? And there's like, I don't feel welcome, or they're uncomfortable, or as someone had mentioned, that it feels political. And that may just be of what the last few years have been of going through a lot of changes. But while they are a good avenue for communication and direct line back to the city, I don't think it's being utilized because it feels like it's not for everyone.
Noelle, can you hear me and speak with us? I'll move on then. So I'd be interested if you can identify any examples of mutual support you see happening already in your neighborhood or other neighborhoods that you know about, where people are really reaching out to one another and providing that kind of care that I kind of see as kind of central to an effort like this. Are there stories that you've heard? Like one that I included in that article in the newspaper that was published a couple of weeks ago. Neighbors down my street during the ice storm had a gas generator that they brought to every neighbor's house, asking like whether they needed some electricity to power up their electronic equipment and kind of re-chill their freezers. And when the ice storm persisted, we were without power for around 10 days. They pulled all of their extended family and found enough generators to give to everybody on the street. And so that was like an incredible thing that just kind of emerged from that particular group. And so I'm just curious about other stories like that you've got. I think it's those stories that can oftentimes inspire people to get a vision of like what might actually happen.
Well, I can say during the ice storm, neighbors who are renting a house, I think he was part of the National Guard, and he had a power saw and came over and cut down another neighbor's tree that was going into the road. And during that same time period, we have a small generator and we hooked it up so that we could supply our own freezer and refrigerator in our neighbors who are also elderly, and did their refrigerator. My husband ran an extension cord. So there's that kind of thing. And again, to go back to Multnomah, we moved out here to be near our kids, and our daughter who's in the West Hills, they have this, gathering. They have, they're on a cul-de-sac, but the whole neighborhood's not on a cul-de-sac. And they have a Halloween party and they have a 4th of July party and the kids come out. And it's really a nice avenue for people to get together, new and old people. You can come if you like.
Right, right. So it sounds actually quite a bit like what's happened in Willamette. So it's nice to know that there are places in the West Hills that that's going on. Any other examples, Mike?
During the ice storm, we were fortunate enough to have gas cooking at our home, but many of our neighbors only have electric ranges in their houses. And without power, there's not really much way you can have warm food if you don't have gas for cooking. So we were able to cook for our neighbors and get them some warm food to help out there. I also recall during the windstorm that preceded the wildfires, there were some power outages, and one of the outages actually stopped at our fence. So our neighbors were without power and we had power, and we have a decent number of extension cords. So we were able to help them out, and their son was able to go to his first day of remote school on account of having power, which I don't know if he was happy or upset about that, but he was able to attend that first day.
Good.
And on our corner, a lot of people are gardeners out here. And so we have people with chickens as neighbors, and they share eggs, and we share the excess pumpkins that we grow, and everybody shares what they have in abundance. And it's nice to be able to participate in that.
Great. Sounds like Humboldt County. So neat. And Cheryl, did you have an example?
I wanted to add something, is that what I've found is that going out walking my dog, I have a very handsome yellow Labrador, and I walk with him every morning, and I have met so many neighbors that way, especially during the pandemic, because many people are getting out and walking. If they might even be walking alone, not necessarily with a dog, but that's helped me get to know my neighbors, not necessarily right on my street, but on the next street. And one of the things is that, if you have children and they're in the school, you could get to know people that way. But since I'm older, I have to find other ways. And part of it is being active and reaching out and things like that. So that was another way I found to be able to meet some of my other neighbors.
Great, thank you. Did you have something else you wanted to share, Christina? Okay, great, thank you.
Really, just again, even before the ice storm and before the really hot spell, when we first moved in, our neighbor, who's a single older woman, had no air conditioning. So he had her over a couple of times for ice cream.
Right.
And again, and I don't mean to say we did this, but that's what I know of, because again, I think the neighbors are in transition, as someone else said. And so to keep up with them is, it's not a chore, it's a delight, but how to do it with COVID. Yeah.
No, exactly. Well, and I think, as folks have mentioned, I think Cheryl had said, it really has put a damper on a lot of those kinds of neighborly experiences. But hopefully things will be opening up, and it seems like a good opportunity to really kind of move forward with something like this. And people might actually be kind of hungry to have those kinds of opportunities as well. I mentioned a bunch of different initiatives, and like the farmers market and the Robin Wood Station repair cafes. And so I'd be interested if there are any other kinds of initiatives that you're aware of in the Willamette area that could actually serve as a springboard to doing this kind of work as well, that could really be allies for this kind of effort. Did you have any thoughts about that, Sue?
Well, you know what, similar, but I was thinking the community center, they no longer call it a senior center, I believe, but since there's a few of us that no longer have children, I wonder if there's some way you couldn't have that on a schedule where it'd be nice to say a certain neighborhood could get together there, but I know not very many people will show up, but just maybe have some avenue through that way to meet. And then within that meeting, you break up by neighborhoods, or you're encouraged to bring someone from your neighborhood. But that's sort of a community source that I think could be utilized.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. That's a great idea. Any other things that I should be aware of? I know when I first wrote the talk tonight, my wife read it and she said, you know, there are a bunch of things going on in West Lake. You've got to be able to include them. And so I, you know, anything that you come up with, I would really be grateful. Yes.
So I was a former chair of an organization called Tools for Troops, which is a nonprofit that people can donate, you know, unused tools, and then we hand them out for free to veterans. And one of the initiatives we're trying to do is get a tool library for the city. And we would have our meetings at Robin Wood Center, and they've got an evidence holding area behind Robin Wood that the police department has. And we're trying to negotiate getting some space so that as we collect tools, that we could have a lending library for people in the city of West Linn in doing that. So that's another initiative that we have that's localized, that is a great thing to belong to.
Thanks very much. I'm really delighted to learn that that's happening and make a big difference. Any other examples that you can think of, initiatives? Are there other things that you think, you know, besides the sort of ideas that I shared, that you think neighborhood resilience teams could really focus on doing? What kind of tasks or kind of social possibilities or fun things could you imagine neighborhood resilience teams zeroing in on and encouraging people to participate in? Because I think that the fun social piece of it is really critical, but so is, you know, looking at ways in which people can be supported. Like, I'd never really thought about the way in which neighbors could support young parents, for example, and the way in which, you know, they, you know, an older couple in the neighborhood might be really interested in just helping with childcare, so that young parents could go out for dinner once every once in a while without having to spend a fortune on childcare costs. And so I think it's just interesting to think about the variety of things that could possibly be done. So any ideas that came to mind as I was talking, or that you have seen elsewhere that you could imagine a resilience team working on?
I think from my previous history is training opportunities. A lot of people, if they're retired, they typically don't have the requirement of being CPR certified or bloodborne pathogens or first aid, things like that, that if you can make arrangements to have an instructor come in, you could get a lot of people to sign up for that so that they could have that for their grandchildren or whomever. Or if it's a new parent, pediatric CPR. That are more fun engagements would be like orienteering and using that as an ability to explore your neighborhood, to see and turn that into a way to find evacuation routes and explore other people within your neighborhood. Just something that gets people engaged.
Yeah.
But I think the best thing that you brought up is the mapping exercise. Right now, it's kind of, you know, how do you eat a 800-pound elephant one bite at a time? If you can get that as a small group and just really map it out and say, you're in my neighborhood, you're in my line that I've drawn, and therefore you're part of this. You can participate, or I just need to know, how am I going to come and rescue you? I think you'll get a lot of feedback and engagement from that.
Right. And I think coupled with that, really identifying the skills that exist within a neighborhood.
Yep.
So that, you know, like, you know, which person you could turn to for plumbing needs, or medical needs, or, the list is really kind of endless. But
I have an anecdote. The National Guard does that all the time,
Uh-huh.
which the active duty doesn't. We put out surveys when we deploy, when I was in Iraq, and you say, hey, what do you do for a living?
Uh-huh.
Right now you're a gun truck driver, but what do you do? Oh, well, I do sheetrock, or I do HVAC or whatever. But once you know those people that, hey, this guy's an accountant, maybe can help my wife do our taxes while I'm in Baghdad, and things like that, then it really helps be what we call a force multiplier
Good.
in having those additional skills.
Uh-huh. Christina, do you have something you want to add? Your hand is just still raised.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, I don't know how to take it down.
Oh, just if you put your arrow on it, at least when I put my arrow on mine, maybe it's, yeah, it'll say lower hand.
Oh, okay.
Good,
Yeah.
great, okay.
Good, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's why you keep coming back to me.
Right. You got it. Good.
Well, I'm not very good. Actually, we just joined CROC, which is the Columbia River Orienteering Society, again, to get to know people. But more locally, although I'm not the adept one at this, there used to be something called geocaching, which is much more contained, which, I could see, since I don't know the city, you could put little historical facts or something salient around the different parts of the city that people could go find.
No, actually, it seems like that would be a wonderful project for neighborhoods to engage in, and work with their kids to come up with the poems that kind of direct people to different geocaches.
Right.
And the whole city could be kind of, those would be spread around so people could do different kinds of searches, which would be really, really fun. I'd never thought about that, but that would really be an interesting thing to do. One more question, and then we can kind of begin to bring this to a close. What factors, aside from the kinds of things that we talked about already in terms of just the difficulty of bringing people together because of the mobility of the population in our town, their busyness, et cetera, but are there other factors that you think we should be really kind of aware of that would interfere with making this difficult to implement?
I'm going to throw it out there is having another thing to do. And I think everyone's touched on it tonight. It's if you can coattail onto things that are already happening and leverage events that are already happening, like the fair, like the concerts in the park, or things at the library. I think a lot of people are very interested in this kind of thing, but they're like, oh, it's another meeting I have to go to, or it's another thing I have to do. So if it can leverage it to not be another thing to do, it may get more traction.
Good idea. And I'm thinking it would be great. One of the things the Sustainability Board Advisory Board might want to do at our booth, if we have a booth at the Old Fashioned Fair, is provide an opportunity for people to have a conversation about neighborhood resilience teams. So that would be one way to kind of piggyback. So any other thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to say, I think we're still maybe at the tail end of the pandemic, but people are a little reluctant to interact with people they don't know well, because of concern about infection, et cetera. So I think that's something that we have to be sensitive about with respect to people's concerns about their health or their children's health, or special medical conditions that would make them more vulnerable to becoming ill. So that's one thing that I've noticed about people interacting.
Yeah, certainly. And I can imagine much of this only really happening once the pandemic has settled down and we're kind of assured that a new variant is not going to be coming down the street. So we're at 7:58. So I'm really grateful that you folks have kind of hung in there. But I'd like to give you my email address. And if you're interested in having any further conversations about this, let me know. And I'll get back in touch with you and, see whether we can create a core of folks who are really interested in moving forward with something like neighborhood resilience teams. So if you have a pencil or paper or pen, my email address is GASmith@lclark.edu. And it was also on the first page of the PowerPoint, which will be posted on the city site, in a few weeks. So once again, GASMITH@lclark.edu. So it's been great to have this opportunity to have a conversation. Thank you so much for joining in, and I'll look forward to seeing some of you in the future.
And
Thank
thank you
you.
for doing this.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you
you
very
very much.
much.
Thanks. It was fun to do. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Thank you, Greg.
Bye-bye.